It is 3 o'clock in the morning and you are staring at your investment account. You are not checking it because you are worried about making rent. You are checking it because you just watched your portfolio swing by $30,000 in a single day. That is more than some people earn in an entire year. And it happened while you were fast asleep. Welcome to the reality of the $1 million threshold in the year 2026. There is something nobody tells you about crossing this specific finish line. The math changes. The psychology changes. And your entire relationship with the world around you fundamentally shifts. We live in a time where inflation has made the old rules of retirement obsolete. Everyone obsesses over getting to that first $1 million. But almost nobody talks about the strange and powerful world that exists once you actually cross that line. It is like training for a marathon and having no idea what happens to your body after you finish the race. The shift is not just about having more numbers on a screen. It is about becoming a completely different type of person in the economic system. Let us start with the math that changes everything for you. When you have $10,000 invested and earn 7% annually, you are making $700 per year. That is a nice dinner or a small weekend trip. When you have $50,000 invested, you are looking at around $3,500 annually. That is helpful, but you are still completely dependent on your daily labor. But here is where things get absurd in your favor. $1 million at that same 7% return generates $70,000 per year. And it requires 0 hours of your time. It requires zero commute. It requires zero dealing with workplace drama or a difficult boss. In 2026, the average household spends a significant portion of their income just to keep up with rising costs. But at $1 million, your investments are not just contributing to your lifestyle anymore. They are potentially funding your entire existence. Your money has become your most loyal employee. It works 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. It generates income while you travel. It generates income while you sleep. It generates income while you do literally anything else you love. This is the first wealth threshold where capital starts outperforming labor for most people. But there is a psychological shift that catches everyone off guard. You stop being a saver and you become a capital owner. These might sound similar, but they are completely different realities. When you are a saver, you are thinking in terms of accumulation. Every single dollar matters because you are building towards something far away. Your entire strategy is offense. You are constantly looking for ways to earn more and save more. But when you become a capital owner with $1 million invested, your mindset shifts to preservation. You are no longer trying to get rich. You are trying to stay rich. And staying rich requires a completely different set of skills and frameworks. Think about the stakes involved now. When you had $20,000 invested at 10% market drop cost, you $2,000. That stings, but it is easily recoverable. When you have $1 million invested, that same 10% drop costs you $100,000. Suddenly, market volatility is not just numbers on a graph. It is real money that could fund multiple years of your living expenses. However, here is the fascinating part that most people do not understand until they experience it. Once you have significant capital invested, market downturns stop feeling like disasters. They start feeling like massive opportunities. When you have $1 million generating income, you have the financial cushion to weather any temporary storm. More importantly, you have the capital to take advantage of situations that require money up front. This is where wealthy people really separate themselves from the crowd. They use market crashes to buy more assets at discounted prices. They can afford to take calculated risks because they already have enough to maintain their lifestyle. Your relationship with work changes completely at this stage. I am not talking about immediately quitting your job today. I am talking about working from a position of absolute strength rather than desperation. When your investments can cover your basic living expenses, every career decision becomes a choice. It is no longer a necessity for survival. You can afford to walk away from a toxic work environment. You can negotiate harder for better compensation because you are not desperate for the next paycheck. You can take risks like starting a business or switching careers. This newfound confidence affects every aspect of how you approach professional opportunities. People who are not desperate tend to make much better decisions. They negotiate from positions of power. They take on projects that align with their values rather than just taking whatever pays the bills. But perhaps the most significant change is how you think about time itself. When you are building toward that first million every hour, you do not spend earning feels wasteful. You are constantly calculating the opportunity cost of your leisure time. But once your capital is generating substantial income, you realize that your time is more valuable than your earning potential. This is when people start making different choices about how they spend their days. They work fewer hours. They choose more fulfilling work, even if the salary is lower. They take longer vacations without worrying about lost income. They spend more time with family. The $1 million threshold also unlocks access to completely different types of investment opportunities. When you have substantial capital, the minimum investment requirements that were once impossible become accessible. Private equity funds and real estate syndications are now on the table. These are not just abstract strategies for the ultra-wealthy. These are tools that become accessible once you have a $1 million foundation. And these tools can dramatically accelerate your wealth building. For instance, many private funds require minimum investments of $50,000 or $100,000. When you only have $20,000 total, these are out of reach. But when you are working with a $1 million portfolio, you can allocate 10% to these high-yield opportunities. Banks and financial institutions also treat you differently now. Getting approved for loans becomes easier when you can show significant liquid investments. Suddenly you qualify for preferred terms. You have access to cheap capital that lets you acquire even more assets. This is the secret level of the financial system that most people never see. They do not just save their way to wealth. They use their existing capital to acquire more capital-producing assets. It is like having a key that unlocks doors that most people do not even know exist. But here is where things get psychologically complex. And it is something that catches most new millionaires completely off guard. The anxiety actually increases in some unexpected ways. When you had $50,000 invested, losing 5% meant losing $2,500. It was painful but not devastating. When you have $1 million invested, that same 5% drop means losing $50,000. You could lose more money in a single bad week than many people make in an entire year. Your daily portfolio fluctuations start exceeding most people's monthly salaries. This creates a completely new type of financial anxiety. I have watched people hit their first million and become obsessed with checking their balances. They refresh their portfolio apps compulsively every hour. They watch their net worth swing by tens of thousands of dollars based on things beyond their control. This is why so many people at this level start shifting toward conservative strategies. They begin prioritizing capital preservation over aggressive growth. The risk tolerance that got you to $1 million often is not the same risk tolerance that helps you keep it. This shift toward preservation is not just emotional. It is mathematically rational. When you have $1 million invested, you are no longer trying to hit a home run. You are trying to avoid striking out. A 20% loss on $1 million sets you back $200,000 and potentially years of progress. But despite these new anxieties, most people report feeling fundamentally more secure. It is because they have a foundation that feels substantial enough to weather most storms. Job security becomes less critical. Health insurance gaps become less terrifying. Economic recessions become less personally threatening. This security creates what I call the optionality mindset. Every major life decision becomes a choice between multiple viable options. It is no longer a desperate attempt to avoid financial ruin. The $1 million threshold also unlocks the compound acceleration effect. This is where the mathematical advantage of large amounts becomes almost absurd. If your $1 million grows by just 8% in a given year, you have made $80,000. That is more than many people contribute to their savings over a decade. This acceleration means your second million often comes much faster than your first. The first million might take 20 years of disciplined saving, but the second million can arrive in as little as 7 years. The combination of continued contributions and growth on a larger base cuts the timeline dramatically. Millionaire investors also start thinking about tax optimization as a core strategy. When your gains are substantial, the difference between paying 15% and 25% is enormous. Tax loss, harvesting, and asset location become worth the complexity. Perhaps the most profound change is how you think about legacy. When you are building your first 100,000, you are focused on your own survival. But when you have $1 million and it is growing faster than you can spend it, you start thinking bigger. You start thinking about what happens to this wealth beyond your own lifetime. This is not just about leaving money to children or charities. It is about understanding that you have created something that can outlive you. You are now a steward of capital that could impact multiple lives for generations. When you are starting out, progress feels slow and invisible. You celebrate small milestones because they represent months of sacrifice. But when you have $1 million, you start thinking in different units. Instead of counting individual dollars, you start thinking in terms of months or years of freedom. A $10,000 expense is no longer devastating. You know your investments will replace that money in less than 2 months. What is really interesting is how this affects your relationships. Money conversations become more complicated. You cannot really complain about market volatility to someone struggling to pay rent. You cannot discuss the stress of a market downturn when your lifestyle is not threatened. This can create a strange form of social isolation. The financial concerns that dominate most conversations become irrelevant to your situation. You have transformed from someone who trades time for money into someone whose money works harder than most people do. The shift from accumulator to capital owner changes everything about how you think and live. If you are serious about building wealth, you must understand this threshold. It gives you a roadmap for what is actually possible once you get there. The journey to the first million is long and it is difficult. But the world that waits for you on the other side is worth every single sacrifice. Keep building your foundation. Keep staying disciplined. The second million is waiting for you, and it will arrive much faster than you think. Your future self will thank you for the work you are doing today in 2026. Stay the course and watch as the math of the universe begins to work in your favor.